show.
Thank you very much. Cheers for having me here.
Pleasure to have you on. I am excited to have someone from the current EF10 cohort to share their experiences. So I think the most relevant place to start as a jumping off point would be when you first got introduced to the rest of the cohort. So talk to me about the bus going to kickoff weekend.
Bus. Yeah, very happily. You don't really know what you're about to step into at all. And you know there's going to be maybe 100 people there from about 8 o'clock in the morning outside the Hammersmith Apollo waiting for this bus to arrive. There's just a sea of people. And there's a few, I guess, EF organisers walking around with some clipboards. You're like, okay, I better talk to them first. And you get sent, so my surname's Woodhouse. You get right to the other side. You're like, oh God, look at all these people I've never met before. And yeah, and actually, weirdly enough, of the first 2 people I met, one of them I am now working with. Yeah, Cam and I met within about 5 minutes of standing in the queue for having a similar surname. And yeah, I mean, it's extremely overwhelming. You're standing waiting for the bus to arrive. Bus arrives and it's a complete potluck as to who you're going to sit next to on the bus. And yeah, I think it was 8 o'clock Saturday morning until 6 p.m. Monday on the 3-day weekend trip. Like, don't really draw breath. Probably the most intense social scenario I've ever been in my life. And it was exhausting. I was so tired by the end. But yeah, met some of the most, I guess, eclectic group of people I'd ever met in my life. It was fascinating.
So what was the experience like on kickoff weekend? Is everybody trying to suss each other out from an early stage? Were you actively starting to look for co-founder? Because of course the context is come and get to know each other. But inevitably people...
Come for a drink, guys. Don't worry about it. Yeah,
people are going to have the end in mind, right? This is what people are here to do. They're here to build a game-changing company. So that's definitely on the brain. So talk to me a little bit about the dynamic going on.
Well, frankly, I just didn't realise at all the size of the opportunity I was walking into until I got there. So, you know, never before had I spent so much time in a room with the kind of backgrounds that people had from all across the world. It was really incredible. And with that in mind, you're like, okay, crap, I've actually got to start a company. Like, how am I going to do this? And your elevator pitch goes from a 5-minute kind of like windy spiel down to about 30 seconds. So name, like where you grew up, what you were doing, and if you've got an idea, what is it? And within, then therefore 30 seconds, you're having in-depth discussions about, kind of microeconomic scenarios, or, for the first time, I'm listening to people designing tech products, which for me was completely new. Yeah, it was really fascinating.
So moving beyond kickoff weekend, there's a gap between that and the start of the program. Yeah. So was there any sort of like
that's like ratchet up the schmoozing straight away, basically.
What was the continuation of conversations like in that period?
So you've got 100 people on this cohort. That's 99 people you can call up. Now, really, you need to have a chat for an hour to get any idea of what they've really done. And I tried to contact as many people as possible. So at this stage, I was a bit of a headless chicken. Like, who's my co-founder? Oh my God, I have literally no idea. You've got a few profiles to look through, and you haven't yet been given the quite precise, like, theoretical startup advice that EF does give once you enter. And therefore, I ended up speaking to lots of people who were never going to be my co-founder because of a non-complementary skill set. So you can have a great chat with anyone, basically. So I approached and probably touched base with about 40 people in between the kickoff weekend and the start of Form. During that time, it's a mixture of phone calls or a coffee or a lunch or a beer, and you get to learn people's stories, basically.
So after that period, you start kickoff week. What do you do when you walk in the room again and there's all the people that you've contacted over that break? Yeah. And there are obviously some people who are top of mind. I'd be interested to know how many there were top of mind for you, who you're like, these are very good candidates for co-founder. Yeah. What do you do next?
It's so tough. So the prerequisites I'd set myself in terms of starting EF was a quite kind of high-powered ethic that I wanted to follow, which is whatever project I'm involved in had to have an environmentally sustainable angle to it. And if someone wasn't willing to pursue that dream, then I was just not interested in co-founding with them. And that's been one of the most interesting discoveries over the last now 6 or 7 weeks or whatever it is, I come from a completely different background to that in the shipping business. So I was helping to move fossil fuels around the world. That sounds like a real pivot in my own career, and it certainly has been. But the premise that I was able to start a company on a subject that I didn't know enough about quite quickly became very clear that I couldn't do that. So frustratingly, I've had to move slightly away from that. You also have to recognize I can't build anything. I'm not a software developer. I don't come from a technological background. And therefore, your co-founder has to be someone like that from my perspective. And therefore, you can basically strike 50 names off the list almost immediately as to someone you're not going to co-found with. Funnily, you're in conversations with people and you walk into the room for the first time, you're like, wow, I mean, what are we going to do here? And you're chatting away, you're having a great chat with someone, and then you find out what their background is. You're like, we're the same. And you have this great chat, and it goes on for a while. You hear all about their life and what they want to do. You're like, wow, I could start a company with this person. And then you're like, well, actually, no, because we just end up talking all day long and not build anything. So that won't work at all. I don't know if I was super strategic about who I wanted to work with on the basis of this change in thought process I've had to go through. I certainly had a couple of like in the first, let's say 10 days where it's just manic, it's chaos. Everyone's like, I'm co-founding with this person, I'm co-founding with this person. And I'm like, oh, I'm not diving in yet, I'm not ready. Do you know what I mean? And that rhetoric was either like a self-defense mechanism, I'm not quite sure, but I got really intrigued in working with possibly 2 people. And I'm not going to mention any names, but in both cases, I'd sent a kind of like soppy message basically saying, I thought last night's chat was really great. I'd be really keen to like follow up, let me know how you get on. And you then get sat down the next day and it's like, I'm going to go and work with this other person. I'm going to be really straightforward with you about it. And you're like, it's fine. It's fine. But deep down, you're like, oh, that really hurts.
The pang of rejection.
So, yeah, exactly that. Like being on a dance floor when you're 16 or whatever. Yeah. And that was a really, really strange feeling. So, yeah, fast forward to the second week and, Cam and I had been chatting away and we were basically, I was talking about the shipping market and how I used to be involved in putting deals together between charters of cargo and vessel owners and the very macro picture that you gain as a result of being a broker in that market. And I was in Asia for 5 years in Singapore. And you learn a lot about international trade and what drives our economies. And I think that he was intrigued to learn about this, coming from a fintech background and a computer science degree. And he was also talking to multiple people. Like, I can't remember quite what happened as to the moment we suddenly realized, actually, let's try and co-found. At the time, you're told that the statistic is 2.4 people per cohort member is the average amount of co-founders you'll have. So you're kind of like, well, mate, should we just have a crack? Because the likelihood of this coming off is pretty low.
Yeah.
And here we are 6 weeks later, and we are still working together. We've got another 2 weeks after this week. So, it may all still go wrong. And so then I guess come around to the whole process of the slightly, I guess it's a desensitization that EF go at great lengths to provide for these difficult conversations you have with people where you've got to let them down. And you've got to do it politely, but also just aggressive. Just, we're done.
Yeah.
And move on. And with that in mind, like that's been a fantastic process for making you throw yourself into something. Because actually, you would be too standoffish about things, perhaps, or equally, you've got into a scenario that you're not interested in being in. So long answer to how was the first week, but yeah, it's absolute chaos. Yeah.
Well, there's an ocean of experience in there, so it's perfectly understandable. Yeah. How has the cohort sort of received this experience that you're kind of referring to here, this experience of having to tell someone, look, it's just not going to work, and be very clear and straightforward and move on to the next? How have you sort of seen other people experience that? Because, of course, you had a couple of situations before where you wanted to work with someone, but you've been one of the people who's stuck with a team for a very long time. So what's the sense you've got of that? Have people been able to take to it quite easily? Has there been, I imagine there's inevitably been tensions at some point. What's the overall sense you've got of it?
Loads of different ways to answer that question. There's definitely some souls on the cohort who've been way too sensitive. This process of being an entrepreneur and actually trying to start something from scratch is incredibly difficult. it's far harder than I ever expected. I started roughly a year ago working in startups for the first time, and it's been impossible, basically. I haven't made any money. I've met lots of cool people and good contacts, but learning doesn't pay you. It's as simple as that. So, it's been as simple as that so far this year. Hopefully that will change going forwards. Yeah, some people have been too sensitive. Others just crack on. Fine, it hasn't worked out. Who's the next person? Who's the next person? Who's the next person? I think one really interesting thing to mention is the kind of rhetoric that's come from everyone involved in that specifically, so I'm the commercial aspect of perhaps a co-founding team. A lot of the technical cohort members were really adamant that they were interested in working on an idea where they could be involved from a strategic high level from the start. They didn't want to just be a developer any longer. They want to build a business and start a company. And I felt that was actually really exciting, starting something brand new with someone who's keen to explore these ideas, strategically from the very start. However, there are others in the cohort who are working on very specific ideas, and they are pretty hell-bent on that one thing. As a result, the potential co-founders in the cohort is far smaller for those people, because they feel like they're perhaps being hired by this one more resolute co-founder, and that's been really interesting to watch. So I personally didn't have a specific idea I wanted to work on, environmental topics, but that's morphed. I mean, yeah, it's been super interesting, and how everyone reacts is different. It's not easy, I think, is the short answer.
For sure. What's interesting for me, just listening to you talk about that, is you didn't have a very clear sense of the why you were doing it. So the sustainability and environmental impact was there, but you were sort of flexible on how you were going to get there. And I get a sense from you as well that was also sort of, you knew that would be a function of who you ended up working with. Is that right?
I mean, yes, in hindsight, that is right, definitely. But I couldn't say there's been much strategy in between, to be honest. The frustrating thing, well, I think one of the main things I've learned here is about, what is my edge? So Cam and I actually very nearly broke up after probably a 10 to 12 day period where we ended up cold emailing a whole bunch of CEOs in the container market. Now, I worked in dry bulk. It's very different to containers. And we'd also had a bunch of conversations with a kind of private equity company in London and an old friend of mine, entrepreneur in Singapore, about starting a platform to deliver some factoring processes for trucking companies. A lot of truckers don't get paid on time, and they would actually take 5% less than what they're owed in order to receive a payment today. And we'd looked at these two ideas quite closely, and frankly, they weren't either big enough ideas or we weren't getting any traction whatsoever, because I didn't have any close friends in those markets. And we sat down and Cam was like, what do you know? What do you know best? And I'm like, well, I spent 5 years, 6 years working in the shipbroking business in the dry bulk market. Okay, well, let's go and explore that. And on the back of that process, we've gone to go and meet, I don't know, it's got to be 10 companies now, had multiple conversations with all sorts of old friends of mine that help you to get at least an introductory course to the business for Cam himself, but also the process of starting to look for problems that can be solved. It's very, very difficult to get into any of these companies, and it's really only goodwill and friendships that have got us this far today, and trying to locate where we might be best placed to actually help these companies improve the way they do their business today is still incredibly, incredibly difficult. And we may not even start a company in 2 weeks' time. I could be, in the park. I tried startups, guys, and it's so hard. I'm over it and I'm out.
Well, let's hope that's not the case and that it all works out, Jake. How have you been getting a sense of the scale of the stuff that you're working on? Because obviously the big idea at EF is that you're building something that's globally ambitious. And at the early stages, it must be really hard to actually get a feel for, whether what you're doing is sort of A, feasible, but B, also globally ambitious. How have you and Cam been sort of managing that process of figuring that all out?
He's better at it than me, for sure. He's like, this isn't big enough, we move on. The whole globally ambitious thing is quite funny, though. You're sat there in the first week, you're like, I don't have a clue what I'm going to do. And someone goes, be globally ambitious. And you're like, whatever, mate. I mean, seriously, And then it was just repeated again and again and again. You actually feel like being kind of brainwashed, like be globally ambitious. You're like, wow, I mean, what does that even mean? So it's incredibly difficult to quantify. Of course, the stories of technology companies that have risen to multi-billion-dollar businesses is the aim, but frankly, how you get there is a minefield. So, of course, we're at the very earliest of stages. One thing I've personally found really interesting is trying to take a view as to what's going to be going on in 10 years' time. How will the shipping business look in 10 years from today? And with that goal in mind, let's trace back to where we are today and what steps can we go through to get to that future, and trying to organise our thoughts into what might be a deliverable product we could supply today to the existing market to then carry out all the steps that we've mapped out. That's a really, really interesting process, and has been just one of many number of theories that has been fascinating to learn about at EF. One of the things I was thinking of mentioning before coming on the show today, 2 years ago, if you'd said to me I'd be sitting in a tech accelerator working on a tech startup, I would have thought you were completely and utterly crazy. And now here I am. So it's been fascinating.
You mentioned sort of like the process and how it's been unfolding as being almost something that's impossible to maneuver strategically in some instances. So it seems pretty chaotic. Interspersed between the chaos, there have been contact points between you, the cohort, and EF, where they've introduced some theory and some ideas. You definitely don't have to say that it's been useful. I'm fascinated, though, to know how useful have those modules, the kind of theoretical aspects of entrepreneurship, been to give you a sort of
some
checking
of it
point?
Some of it just like, I'm like, whatever. That's the most boring thing I've ever read in my life. And I've got my audio book going, and you're on the tube, and you're like, this is just drivel. Like, and you force yourself to listen to it, and still you're like, I don't know what that means. But some of it has equally been very important. So I was involved in a project at the start of this year that I actually co-founded a business in December, and it frankly hasn't gone very well. We didn't ever make any money, and we were applying for some government grant to move the business forwards. And some of the hallmarks of the problems we had there are, for example, like one co-founder is working full-time, the other isn't. The vision of the company is perhaps not fully aligned long-term. The actual skills that are required to get that vision up and running perhaps weren't in the co-founding team, specifically in myself. So I was trying to work in energy tech, having previously been a shipbroker. Like you don't have the base knowledge and network to really make that business flourish. Now, whatever happens with that company, the lessons from that I would not have learned had I not come into EF, because what I now see is a totally obvious way of how you should start a company. We didn't know, and we made a lot of mistakes, and I will still make many, many more to come. But some of the best theories, simply the co-founding team. So, you need a combination of analytical skills, engineering skills, product vision skills with business development acumen, hiring, moral support, and that was like, wow, learning that such an obvious thing to say. You're like, actually, that's so true. What have been some of the other ones that have been great? Yeah, I mean, the Fierce Conversations book, like, just get on with it. Tell someone how it is and just move on. Like, it's not a big deal. We're all here to try and start a company. It's going to be difficult. And if you're not up for it, well, the door's over there. Yeah. You know how simple it is. I'm trying to think of some other ones. The mum test, that is the most awesome thing probably of all of them. It's just such an obvious piece of theory in hindsight. The amount of bad business ideas that people have actually spent time trying to build, along with raising finance and all the people that would have been let down on the back of it, if you don't use the theories that book explains, that, as you'll know, that's just the kind of passive questioning of potential customers. Hi mum, I've got this great business idea, will you listen to me? And they're like, sure, okay, fine, get off my back, I'm not interested. But and entertaining some terrible idea for a product they'll never buy, but because you feel bad and you want to make them feel good, you say, yeah, sure, I'd buy that. The startup entrepreneur is going, that's gratification, this is a good idea, let's go and do it. And the person that you think's your first customer is in their head going, I would never buy that. And reapplying that to real world scenarios has been super interesting, because what comes back is not what you expect. Like we've already thought about, I don't know, 5 viable business ideas to get to the future that we're looking at, and they've been struck off the list for all sorts of reasons that actual life conversations that we've had with people in the market have made us realize we were wrong. And if we weren't using those kind of techniques and you didn't have the right co-founding team, etc., it would be even more difficult than it already is. So I've valued it massively, and I'm hoping that when I finish at the cohort, depending on what happens with the company, you'd have something to value yourself with and offer to other startup companies. So in terms of trying to move away from being a broker and move into the startup space and the next 10 years, it alone will be a valuable process.
Awesome. So great to hear that you've been learning a lot of stuff that's going to hopefully be valuable no matter the outcome. Let's cycle back now to the pre-application stage and your sort of experience. So you got out of uni. What happened next? Sure. And give me the sort of like quick rundown of how you ended up getting interested in startups, building one yourself, and doing a bit of angel investing as well.
So I grew up on the south coast of the UK, went up to business school in Leeds, finished back in 2011. Leaving uni, the normal kind of who am I problem that most graduates have. You're juggling jobs in about 5 or 6 different markets if you can get near one. And I ended up getting a role, funnily actually, sliding doors moment really. The first role I was accepted was an unpaid internship for an off-grid solar company up in Shoreditch. And I was about to start that, and I got a call from a shipping company that I'd contacted months and months before with a broking job, so a junior broker role. And I ended up going to work for the shipping company, so internationally recognized, they're going to pay you a salary and stuff. And so contrary to my interests in green technology, I went to go and work with a shipping company essentially that were helping to move coal and iron ore around the world, so it couldn't really be more different. Spent a year or so in London doing that, and then got an opportunity to move to Singapore. So 2012 moved there and spent 4.5 years working for a company called Arrow on their Capesize desk. So you're the middleman between big mining companies like Anglo American and Rio Tinto and large shipping companies. So vessels are 300 meters long, 50 meters wide. They carry 180,000 tons of iron ore in one load, or 150,000 tons of coal, predominantly to go to China for steel mills, to then, the very, very birth of our societies, basically. So steel, of course, in the automobile industry, in any kind of, roads and hospitals and airports, and coal, of course, the main electricity source and still is today. After 4 or 5 years of doing that, the process of being away from my family for a long time and traveling back and forth from Asia, I was ready for a new opportunity, and I didn't love my role as a shipbroker enough to warrant moving to another company, to be a competitor to my previous team, to commit to another 5 years in Asia. So I decided on moving back to England. I took some time off, a few months traveling and stuff, and then about a year ago back in London, I started looking for a new project. And I guess it's a combination of a few things. So slightly sad story, my father passed away about 10 years ago now. But we sold his house at the time, and so I was able to get some capital, and I was like, well, maybe I can work for myself. That's the aim. Is you don't want to work for a broking company forever. You can have a very, very, very nice life doing that, but frankly, in 10 years' time, the upside is only as good as the market is. It's only that bonus every year. I want to work for myself. Great, and so off you go. And frankly, your CV, it says shipbroker, and you go to a green technology company. I was like, right, I want to get into the green tech. Let's go. No interest, mate. No interest, mate. And you felt like you're back at uni again. You're like, oh my God, I don't know who I am. Like, this is like being a graduate again with a CV, going to people and all the rest of it. Like 6 or 7 years has gone by. What the hell's going on? And so I thought, let's have a crack at this whole angel investing thing. And I read a book called Angel by Jason Calacanis. It said how to turn 100 grand into 100 million. I was like, wow,
that's the book for me.
If I can get anywhere near to what that bloke's done, then maybe that's not a bad idea. So started going to networking events, spent a lot of time at Imperial College in particular, looking for green technologies that were at a startup phase and really getting to grips with what it means to get a prototype out of the basement of a lab and into a market where it's manufactured at scale and is actually cost effective against existing fossil fuels. And it's tough. It's really, really tough. It takes a huge amount of capital. It takes a huge amount of time. I started building out the network and did some more reading around what I was supposed to be doing. You're looking for a product, a team, a market, a potential exit. I employed a few people to help me analyze the pitch decks I was getting. And I think I probably looked at maybe 40 or 50 companies with the intention of being a kind of solo angel into their dreams. And I was completely inexperienced. You're not an analyst from a financial background, but you reckon you can have a crack. And luckily I realized that I was fighting a pretty foolish game. And I actually didn't make a single investment over a 6 to 8 month period, and I have only just done so in the last month. And even then, very, very small amounts through a syndicate that I've met that have helped do all of the due diligence and get the shareholder agreements together and have a look at the legal aspect to everything. Plus, who are their customers? Go out and talk to them. Check that this startup's actually doing what they say they're doing. But I guess part of that process, I met entrepreneurs for the first time, and you're like, hang on a second, what's going on here? Like, this is an interesting job. And I guess my reasoning to then start as an entrepreneur was, well, to be a good investor, you need to understand what it's like to be an entrepreneur in itself. And therefore, I need to be an entrepreneur. I'd also had some problems where decent entrepreneurs and decent startups that I found weren't really interested in working with me because I didn't represent smart money. I didn't represent someone with a book of contacts in the green energy business who were going to help that company to the next step. So, right, need to be an entrepreneur. And during that shift in thought process, I'd come across EF, and before I was like, it's 6 months away, whatever, I'll apply, but I want to start a company anyway, so let's go. And I already mentioned this energy tech company that I got going, and all the problems that we had there. But yeah, so roughly speaking, I came through the broking business, got back to London, and through the attempted angel investing that I was doing, I learned about entrepreneurs, and through that, I wanted to actually do it myself.
Interested to sort of hear your thoughts on what were the doubts going through your mind when you were. It was a slightly unique situation for you, given the fact that you'd been doing a little bit of angel investing and getting close to the entrepreneurs. But I still imagine there must have been a few doubts about jumping in and doing it yourself. What if anything, was kind of holding you back, or was making you think twice about it?
Gosh, good question. So, thinking twice, of course, is the reliance on an income to live on. So, you're not going to make a great salary from an early stage company as an employee, or equally as a founder. So that's one of the main hurdles that you've got to get by. And of course, EF gives you some stipend to get through, and that's a big factor in aiding this process of starting companies. To be honest, I haven't seen it as that big of a challenge switching from trying to be an angel investor into being an entrepreneur, just on the basis that I know that that's what I have to do first. So I had this target, angel invest in green tech. The first question, does this company envisage a low carbon economy? If it's a yes, carry on looking at it. Well, that's a noble reason to invest in a company, but it doesn't make the company any good that you're looking at. And I think it's just an interesting nuance to have as a now entrepreneur, looking at getting funding for the idea you have, and knowing the depth of the due diligence that people put into potentially investing, and how good we're going to have to be to get to that stage. But no, I've enjoyed both of them so far. It's very different to my last job, but I've taken the decision that for a few years this is where I want to search for some upside, and I'm convinced that in the next 10 years this will be the way to actually be successful, rather than working for a big corporation.
Well, let's hope that's the case, Jake. I think.
Yeah, touch wood.
I think I could definitely spend much longer sitting here drawing out all of the gossip about the cohort from you.
There's none.
In the interest of time, let's finish up with just a couple of final thoughts from you. What advice would you give to someone who is on the fence about applying to the EF process?
Do it. Just get on and do it. There's no. Yeah, you're going to ask a second half of that question. I jumped in. Just get on with it. Why not? You've got nothing to lose.
And once they're on, any advice about navigating the chaos that is the sort of early stages of finding a co-founder?
Ask me that in 6 weeks' time if I've got funding.
I'll come back and do that then, Jay. Maybe we can do an episode 2. Thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Thank you very much. Cheers for having me. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.